Homestuck is a webcomic which has many connotations surrounding it. With it being deeply entrenched in 2009 internet culture, it only makes sense that characters would represent parts of groups prevalent on the internet 16 years ago. However, what many fans seem to either miss or purposefully ignore is the fact that these characters, specifically the trolls, are not only meant to represent certain online cliques, but satirize them. I don't really blame anyone for forgetting the satirization in Homestuck, as it is one which is very underdeveloped. What's specifically interesting to me is how Homestuck attempts to, and largely fails at, satirizing gender roles and norms in society. This is interesting because this isn't the first work I know of in which gender roles are satirized incompletely, and Homestuck loses the plot in terms of being a satire in a very similar way to the other work I'm thinking of. The work in question is the book that F. Scott Fitzgerald appropriated from his wife, The Great Gatsby, which gives up at the halfway point on trying to satirize the roles of gender and class in society, and instead chooses to focus on how romantic it is that Daisy has a stalker. Even despite the similarity in failed satire, The Great Gatsby has a lot to say about how we as a society view gender roles, and I believe many of those concepts, unfortunately, apply to the modern day. Hi, hello, ciao, and bonjour. My name is Carmen Carrington, and today I will be exploring how underdeveloped and failed satires ultimately reinforce what they are trying to satirize. Hegemonic masculinity, as coined by Raywin W. Connell, is a term used to define any system which sustains male dominance in a hierarchical order. A facet of this idea, heavily utilized in modern discourse surrounding gender roles and norms, is toxic masculinity. As coined by Shepard Bliss, it's defined by militarized and authoritarian masculinity. However, typically it is exhibited to be any masculine action or expectation which abets masculine hegemony, such as male aggression and even racism or homophobia. While of course the moniker of toxic masculinity can be more than handily applied to the incel ideology exhibited by Erdan Ampora, I believe a more traditional version of masculinity lies with Equius the Hawk. Equius, I would say, is a quintessential manly man. Much akin to Tom Buchanan, his primary traits are being big and racist.
You've never played a fun pretend game with me ever, even once. Even Karkat does it sometimes, even if he does mean it in a grumpy and insincere way. But at least it's still fun.
Yuck. Don't pollute my incoming data stream with his name or any sort of excremental language you pick up from his ilk.
I see right through your stupid act. Who are you trying to kid? Look at that silly little bow and arrow you always type. It's always there, you never forget. Why would you do that if it wasn't a playful, fun thing? I'm so onto you.
My bow and arrow are highly dignified symbols.
LOL, VS.
Archery is among the highest and most exceptional crafts, held in tremendous regard by the most aloof classes for centuries.
You suck at archery.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No, I don't.
Yes, 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 yes. Have you ever even successfully fired an arrow? Like, actually got one to leave the bow?
I think we need to stop talking about archery.
Macy rolls her eyes almost as hard as she is rolling around in this really interesting smell.
The thought of you fraternizing with and abetting those stink-blooded hooligans strikes me as scandal beyond measure. I'm afraid you're too delicate to withstand that sort of corruption. It's forbidden.
No,
Yes, you won't.
No, I will.
You won't.
You can't stop me.
I'm telling you not to, and you will be on my team, that's final. Do you typically embrace such a passive attitude when your superiors give you orders?
I don't usually receive orders from superiors or otherwise, but really, it's fine. What?
Forget it. It's just pleasant to consort with one of lesser breeding who clearly understands her place.
As your server, I manipulate your environment to help you advance.
I don't understand. Are you saying that you are in a position of control over me?
I suppose so.
This is impropriety of a caliber I cannot even... You're as low on the hema spectrum as possible. To consider that someone so low could be in a position of authority over me is just... It's just so... disgusting. I'm fine. I'll be fine. I just need to breathe. And to break something, possibly.
Break something.
Yes, it helps me relax.
The problem is, much like Tom Buchanan, who is sort of forgotten about after the narrative shifts to focus on Daisy and Gatsby, Equius is a character that is forgotten about. In the text itself, he's a pretty half-baked satire, as although the framework for a really interesting character is there, someone who tries desperately to be masculine despite it actively hurting them, he devolves before this character can be realized into a panicking homosexual with a race play fetish. The satire of Equius is not one of masculinity, but rather a strawman argument about people who fake being masculine and how they really need to man up. And this really only serves to reinforce toxic masculine expectations in society. Homestuck, through an incomplete satire, inadvertently makes the claim that a man cannot have long hair and be interested in technology. He needs to be authentically strong and authentically racist. And if he isn't, then he isn't really a man at all.
Make her a member of the Midnight Crew.
Homestuck's narrative framework relies on a standard of masculinity being the default. Specifically when it comes to plot progression, a woman's agency more often than not comes with a caveat or a lack of acknowledgement in spite of a clear goal of subverting gender norms. This isn't anything new though, as media has been policing women's agency for as long as women have been depicted in media. The women of Homestuck can largely fall into two categories: complacent women who are pushed around by the plot, and women with agency who are considered wrong or malicious for having it. Worse yet, there are some glaring double standards in which men are reasonable for taking actions that women are hysterical for taking, which serve to undermine the most important women in the plot. Kanai Mariam is one such example. She is introduced with very traditionally feminine traits, specifically being a motherly caregiver, a gardener, and a fashionista. In contrast to these traits, however, she is shown to possess the same reasoning and logic that is typically allocated to the men of Homestuck, as well as having no qualms with getting violent if need be. These contrasting traits serve to make her more than just the quintessential woman, and paint her as more of an aloof and blunt, yet protective kind of mother. During the arc near the end of Act 5, Act 2, when Gamzee begins hunting down and killing the other trolls, Kanaya assumes a leadership position atypical of other women leaders thus far in the plot, the main difference being that she is mostly allowed to lead without a man overshadowing her. Unfortunately, the narrative makes her forego some of her integral traits, such as her care, to make her portray a masculine level of violence akin to Gamzee or Eridan earlier in the arc. She regains her more traditionally feminine traits after the conclusion of Act 5, Act 2, as well as her understandable vendetta against Gamzee. However, despite other characters saying that Gamzee needs to be stopped and that what he did is unforgivable, Kanaya is treated as hysterical for having a grudge against him.
And Gamshi.
Oh,
See, I bumped into him earlier.
you did? Where?
No, please don't get angry and go on another vengeful clown hunting expedition. This is the point. This is what's troubling me about this. I don't want anyone to fight.
Kanaya fails as a subversion or critique of gender norms in a semi-similar way to Equius. Despite the narrative allowing her to be a well-rounded and balanced character in terms of traditionally masculine and feminine traits, she has to remove her femininity in order to not be overshadowed by male characters as a leader, and when her femininity is regained, she is treated not as the balanced character she was before, but just another hysterical dame, despite her saying exactly what the men are saying. No, I don't get to talk about Latula because I'm talking about bad satire. Terezi Pyrope is a character who not only fails as a subversion of gender norms like Kanaya and Equius, but also fully fails at satirizing the traits she was written to satirize. Firstly, does she subvert gender norms? Yes, but with a catch. She does so in the most tropey and surface-level way possible, as Homestuck clearly conflates the making of a strong feminine character with attaching overtly masculine traits to a female appearance. This isn't the most overtly harmful thing in writing, as for instance, I believe the reason Kanaya largely succeeds as a subversive woman character is because she has a balance of traditionally feminine and masculine traits. However, I suppose that's the difference, isn't it? Terezi is gender-bent car cat, and barely anything more than that. Worse yet, the narrative sometimes can't decide if it wants her to be a strong woman or a pretty face, as she acts uncharacteristically flirty in certain scenes, particularly with Dave and Carcat, just to cause conflict in the plot. Similarly, later on, the story can't decide if she needs to be a victim or a victimizer, as she's taken advantage of by Gamzee, however still treated as malicious for the decision she made earlier to kill Vriska. And I tell myself those were the only two vortices I saw, but then I was the one who made the series of decisions which led up to that choice, and completely painted the options into that corner. I just wish I could tell her that. Which one would you tell it to? Huh? The one who fought Noir, or the one who didn't? Oh, I mean, I guess either? But I was thinking more about the one whose death I'm actually responsible for. Ah. Well, this could be my experience as an ancient ghost talking, or the perspective I am naturally given to as a light player. But aren't you equally responsible for both? You could look for absolution through rationalization. Everyone would have died if you didn't take action, so why trouble yourself with guilty emotion? But there's no real healing power in believing that, and I don't think it's what you wanted to tell yourself anyway, is it? Not really. Or what about through renunciation of responsibility? If you were just a tool used by reality to perpetuate itself, where's the blame? But that would be another empty idea that has no power to heal. You've been led to believe such acts of violence are natural for your kind, and that if you're upset by the consequences, then something is wrong with you. But it isn't as natural as you think. As mentioned previously, Terezi is not just a failure to subvert gender norms, but also a failure at satirizing self-righteousness. Her whole character, that isn't derivative of Karkat or arbitrarily assigned for conflict, is having a skewed moral compass and sense of justice. The problem is that her inflated ego from always being right is abetted by the narrative with her actually always being right. The only time she's wrong, in fact, is when the plot artificially makes her wrong when she kills Vriska. Despite her doing this for the greater good, which is often praised as mature in Homestuck's male characters, the narrative paints her decision as both the best possible decision and the incorrect one to make. Everything about her character, from her failure to subvert gender norms to her failure to satirize self-righteousness, is all very easily fixable, and I suppose that's what annoys me the most. Terezi would have been the easiest character to write. Have her think she's always right, have her typically be wrong. It really is that easy. Even keeping the idea of her grappling with her own moral compass when killing Vriska could elevate her from a satire to a genuinely very profound character. But yet again, Homestuck starts characters as a satire, but forgets to develop them or changes their character entirely, leading to Terezi being kind of a neat character, but forgettable, instead of a genuine satire or critique. One of the first critiques I ever had when reading Homestuck was the way in which the narrative introduces important, or seemingly important, characters, only to throw them away for the sake of plot progression or a character's personal arc progression. These characters are, more often than not, women, which serves to discredit the concept of female characters being important to the narrative. While making a woman important is not necessarily satire in of itself, it is still an affront to traditional gender norms in which women are expected to be beneath men hierarchically. The fact that Homestuck largely chooses to undermine important women is not necessarily an underdeveloped satire, however it does fly in the face of satire as a genre. Aradia Megiddo and Pfeffery Pisces exemplify this, serving as important female characters whose narrative purpose is dissolved into furthering the development of Solek's captor. Aradia, despite her importance to the beta troll session and arranging key events in the story, gets reduced in both life, death, and double death to Solek's ex-girlfriend. Her murder is not treated as tragedy for anyone except Solek's. Almost the entirety of Solek's character arc is aided and guided by Aradia, as her death is the tragedy that starts it and her guidance is the shepherding that ends it. However, in spite of this, the narrative treats Solek's as if he matured entirely on his own and disregards the fact that Aradia was even a factor in it. Similarly, Pfeffery sounds important when she's introduced, as she's the heir to the Alternian throne and the first troll to contact the Earth Kids. In spite of this, her death gets the reverence of a single panel which reads, "She is dead." He, Solek's, is not going to take it well when he wakes up. You hope he just stays asleep for a while. This is textbook fridging, a literary trope in which female characters suffer harm or death in order to incentivize or motivate male characters. Aradia and Pfeffery are reduced to romantic foils and points of trauma for Solek's, and treated as plot points, not characters. Funnily enough, while writing the script, I realized that the same exact thing happens to Myrtle in The Great Gatsby, as her death is what inspires George Wilson to kill Gatsby at the end of the book. At its core, satire is meant to make harmful cultural norms absurd. It's meant to hold a mirror up to power dynamics and laugh at the reflection. Satire is a form of critique, not just comedy. Yet, when a satire forgets itself, there's no longer such a critique, but rather reinforcement. Homestuck as a narrative consistently outputs unfinished satires in its characters, with most of these characters being forgotten about, having their core traits erased or changed, or just not going far enough. At its worst, Homestuck actively rejects satire by upholding harmful tropes and consistently pushes that masculinity and femininity are hard concepts which will be adhered to, never subverted, never satirized. Is it still fun? Yes, of course. I've had a lot of fun reading it with my partner over the last few months, and sometimes it does have a poignant message or two, specifically with my favorite characters Latchula Pyrope and Roxy Lalonde, hence why they're my favorites. But it's still important to analyze what the story does and what it doesn't, what norms it does break and which it adheres to, as if we ignore these factors, then we are willingly allowing ourselves to be manipulated based on society's binary and the social constructs which hurt us. There's a lot more that I would have liked to say if not for lack of time, and perhaps I'll end up making 1 or 2 follow-up videos on those topics. But regardless, I've been and will continue to be Carmen, and thank you for watching.